Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the final session of Product Drive 2025. So after this one will be a wrap. We're really glad that you all made it this year. I'm your host, Jessica Tabaka. I'm the Director of Demand Gen here at User Pilot, and we have Blanca Champetier. Hopefully I said that correctly. Here with us today. She's going to be going over vibe coding, a game changer. And before we get started, uh, over the last 2 days, we've heard from product leaders and growth experts on how AI is reshaping the way that we build, price, and scale products. And so we have a lot of information, a lot of really valuable information we'll be sharing after the event. There will be a link to the entire playlist on YouTube available for everyone to see. And before I introduce the speaker, I have to do my little plug. If you don't know who User Pilot is and you're here today just because you know who Blanca is, um, we would just like to let you know what we do. User Pilot's an AI-enabled product growth platform, and it automatically captures user behavior and events and generates custom dashboards, allowing product teams to easily build powerful in-app engagements. From walkthroughs and checklists to gathering user feedback, you no longer need developer support. Also, we just launched our new product growth agent yesterday, Leah. So if you didn't catch that with Yazan yesterday, you will be able to see that in the playlist in YouTube. But we will be giving everybody who is attending this event a free 3-month POC of our platform. So please be on the lookout for that as well. All right, before I move forward with getting you started, Blanca, let me just introduce you quickly. Blanca Champetier is the Senior Director of Product Management at Top Hat, where she leads initiatives that enhance digital learning experiences for educators and students. She holds a master's degree in general engineering with a specialization in project management from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia. I wasn't going to say it in Spanish. Her background spans architecture, integration, and sales, and she is recognized for her ability to bridge technical knowledge with business strategy to deliver impactful product outcomes. So without further ado, Blanca, please join us.
Thank you, Jessica. And that was a perfect pronunciation of my last name. I am impressed. So thank you. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's very nice to meet all of you virtually. So yeah, as Jessica mentioned, I'm currently working at a company called Top Hat. It's an educational platform for higher education for instructors and students. And as of today, I've been in product for more than 10 years now, even though I don't really like to admit it because I do start to feel a bit old, kind of like looking at that number. But in my career, I've done a bit of everything from big consulting companies to super early stage startups. And now more than ever is the time when I'm having the most fun doing products. And this is thanks to vibe coding. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. Essentially how vibe coding changes the way we as product people can bring ideas to life, how it dramatically accelerates the good old build, measure, learn cycle with at least a 10x factor, and why this is a complete game changer for the product craft and for finding product market fit. So if you're not leveraging vibe coding on your day-to-day yet, I hope this talk helps you understand why you should and how to do it. And if you are, maybe this talk will give you some well-deserved validation. All right, so let's get started. Let's start with the beginning. I'm gonna assume many of you are in some kind of like product roles or working at product companies. So you're probably already familiar with this diagram. Essentially, this illustrates the product discovery and delivery process. It's not new, it's been around for ages. But basically, the premise of it is that there's essentially two big stages in product delivery. The first one is more on the exploration side. This is where you explore the problem widely, you come up with ideas, you evaluate, you research, you do a bunch of kind of like conversations with customers, divergent in nature, and you really pin down the problems that you want to solve. And then the second stage is more around the validation process. This is where you start converging, you start sketching out ideas that kind of like map to the problems that you had defined before. And as part of that, you start building prototypes in order to validate your ideas and your solutions with prospects and with users. So it's really the solution space. Next slide, please. Right. So, no, actually, sorry, previous slide. Yes. Okay, it's fine. All right. So traditionally, the way we approach the validation phase is twofold. So The first kind of like basic thing that we traditionally do is we start building some design mockups. It could be wireframes or more high fidelity designs. But anyway, the point is that you start illustrating and sketching your ideas of your features and you start showing them to users to get some validation. And then the next thing you would do is to actually build the MVP of the feature and have small group of users testing it out and start to kind of like validate more with like real usage. But the problem with this is that this usually comes after having 15 debates of what is that MVP, MLP, alpha, pilot product, whatever you call it in your organization. And this usually comes also after having 7 or 10 conversations with design and engineer on whether it's okay to cut this scope or that scope and what you're going to do about the color, etc., etc. So if this feels familiar, bad and good, because this is exactly what vibe coding has the power of changing for you. And this is really, really important because if you accelerate this by a pace of 10x, which I assure you vibe coding really has the power of doing, it means that instead of validating one idea in a given time frame, you can now validate 10. So just think of what this can mean for the velocity of your product organization and finding product market fit. All right, so let's run through an example and see how it plays out. Let's say that you're a product manager of a learning app, and for the sake of the story, I'm going to call my app Thinker. So Thinker is doing great as a platform. You have hundreds of thousands of students using it every day, and you're a dutiful PM. So you follow the double diamond process that we just went through. And through your exploration, you find out and you discover that students want some kind of collaborative note-taking section inside Thinker, which would be a place where they can write notes, share them with other classmates, and add comments. So how would these normally go? Well, I don't know about you in your own companies, but for me, how this usually goes, and you can go to the next slide, Jessica. The classic thing is that you would start by writing some kind of like PRD, maybe a 5-page PRD, full of bullet points explaining how the feature needs to function. Or maybe if you're more daring, you build a slide deck with a vision for the feature. And then, so you would have some meetings with stakeholders, they give you feedback, you change a few things, etc. And then finally, you hand it to design, who would create some beautiful wireframes with fake notes that say note 1, note 2, and lorem ipsum, all very realistic. And then you spend 3 meetings debating the fonts, the arrows, and whether the comments should be included in this iteration or not. And then a few weeks later, you finally pass that along to engineering to build a very streamlined version of the feature set, or as we commonly call it, the MVP. And then you release it to a few students only to discover that they are using it in a completely unintended way. So they leave hundreds of far from constructive critiques to the instructor. They overuse some questionable emojis, such as the eggplant one, which turns out instructors do understand what it means as well. And as a result, instructors reach out en masse to your support team, asking to turn off the feature immediately, and you're left with only a handful of students using it as it was supposed to. And so here you are again, back to the drawing boards and writing other PRDs or slide decks on how the feature can function differently. You go through the whole cycle again because you are a dutiful PM, and maybe in a few months you will have gotten it right as a feature. So that's not ideal, right? And there has to be a better way. So the good news is that we live in a very exciting time, and now there is a better way. So compare that to vibe coding. You can go to the next slide, Jessica. So if you compare that to vibe coding, if you run through the exact same process, but we put vibe coding at kind of like the center of the process and as a tool that we should be using within the product lifecycle. So you start by validating your idea instead of by creating mockups, doing meetings and debates on like how the feature is going to function, you just simply go to a vibe coding platform, using Lovable here as an example, because I find that is like by far the most powerful and simple for anyone that hasn't gotten started for vibe coding. So you go to Lovable and you just type, add a collaborative note-taking panel, blah, 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 on the right side of the lesson view and any type of requirements that you want. And honestly, that's it. without any type of meeting, any type of kind of like debate with anyone else. Lovable just, or any vibe coding platform, just kind of like creates a prototype for you in minutes. You can go to the next slide, please. So you have your prototype, and this is an experiment, right? It's a test to validate if this feature is desirable and whether it's going to have value. So you don't really need to bother your already very busy designers and engineers. You can honestly do that later once you have the evidence that this feature will actually be impactful. So instead of setting your meetings with kind of like other stakeholders, what you do is you kind of like finish prompting, you finish your prototyping, and you actually hand this out to your real users right away. And so suddenly by doing that, instead of seeing notes such as lorem ipsum, note one, etc., you see real comments. You see things like this formula is impossible, or give me an exam hint, or this homework makes absolutely no sense. The prof doesn't know what they're talking about. And so just like that, you know that, for example, a feature such as moderation, that maybe was like at the bottom of your priority list, now needs to be number one in your priority list. And this is important because you're not guessing anymore. You know what are the things that are going to be part of your integral part of your feature sets, and needs to be part of your first release. And that's exactly the beauty. Instead of guessing, you go from knowing, you have the evidence of live data. So you've gone from something that took probably multiple months to something that is going to take a few weeks and just one person. All right. So actually, can you go back to the previous slide, Jessica? You're going a little bit too fast for me. Thank you. Okay. All right. So at this stage, I think a natural question that usually arises is, well, you can do most of that and many times all of that through a static design. And yes, I think that's partially true, but here's my take on this. So if you have already validated the desirability and value of an idea, and now you're at the stage of validating the usability of it, like in a very precise, pixel perfect kind of way, sure, a design or a Figma prototype will do, and vibe coding is actually probably an overkill because it is an expensive process after all. And it also does not yield to the level of fidelity that you would want in terms of design. With this said, if you're testing a complex user flow where there's lots of paths and clicks, and that's an important part of the feature, or even if the feature is kind of like outputting content, for example, AI generated content, I do think vibe coding gets you much farther. And definitely where vibe coding wins is if you want to test with real users in conditions that approximate live conditions as much as possible, or if you're testing for the feasibility from a technical perspective. I'm very, very bullish that the last two use cases here are really, really the key to building good products and features. And this is therefore where most of our energy, at least as product managers, and I would dare to say a little bit as designers as well, should really go. All right. So to expand a little bit on the feasibility one, let me run you through another small use case. So the use case we walked through just before really touched on validating the desirability and value of a feature, maybe a little bit the viability. But now imagine you have questions about whether an idea you have is feasible, technically speaking. So let's say, for example, that you want to find out whether you can use an API, let's say, of a third-party service for integration purposes. So let's say you've never used that API, and of course you can go and read the documentation, and that should probably always be the first step. But until engineering actually looks at it and does some investigation for you and kind of like summarizes the findings more from a technical perspective, in general, you won't have the full certainty of the details that you need. So in this case, you can, and I would dare to say you should, be also using vibe coding to build a prototype using such API. And that way you'll really become an expert on what is possible and what is not possible and what are the limitations. And that's important, right? Because out of all of the kind of like risks that you were seeing on like these slides, So you have the desirability risk, the viability risk, feasibility one. Vibe coding can really reduce the risk in like most of these area. And no one wants to work on things that no one will end up using, right? Designers don't want that, engineers don't want that, PMs don't want that. So this is really the avenue to minimize to minimize the risk of that happening. Okay, so with all of that, I, for one, have been wondering a lot, what does it mean for us as product organizations, and what does it mean for us in our day-to-day job? And a common question that I've been hearing from my peers and from folks around me over the last few months is what does that mean for designers, for example? Does that mean we don't need designers anymore? We don't need engineers? We don't need product managers? And I'm pretty certain the answer to all of these questions is no, like in capital letters, because prototypes are really not capable to produce the level of quality a designer or an engineer would. There's so many nuances to how you build something in the right way, and I really don't see vibe coding replacing that. What I do see, though, and it's important to recognize if you're working in a product organization, is a trend towards all of these roles slightly shifting. So, for example, for product managers, I think that's gonna shift to a much higher cadence and velocity of experimentation. At the end of the day, PMs are and should remain the experts in terms of what the user wants. What does that mean in terms of priorities? Kind of like taking the roles of the composers and organizing and orchestrating these different experiences. But they should be able to do that much more quickly now and with a lot more evidence and less guessing games. So I think the focus on product managers being able to gather the data out of the experiments and the learnings is going to be even more important than it was before, and doing this much quicker than they were doing it before is going to be an expectation in the role. And then on the side of designers and engineers, I think these roles will kind of naturally shift towards building fewer experiments. So instead, they will spend like their time building for quality, security, and scalability. And actually, I think this is already happening. There's the quick expectation that this is quickly becoming an expectation for product managers for example, you can go to the next slide, Jessica. So a couple of months ago, I came across this post from Google's head of product on how he talked how they're moving from a writing first culture to a building first culture due to vibe coding at Google. And I really like the reason that are stated in this post. First, because it talks about how PMs can now show and not tell. So I do believe many of the issues that we encounter through the product development lifecycle really stem from miscommunication and communication breakdowns. So, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about something that doesn't exist yet, everything is pretty ambiguous. The picture looks very different in everyone's minds, but the minute you start showing something, the conversation completely changes. So building these prototypes in a very kind of like cheap and easy way with vibe coding really, really helps mitigate that. And then secondly, and for anyone that has experienced vibe coding, I think they can probably attest to this, but creativity and building are happening in parallel. This is really truly the case. Like how many times have you jammed with someone, like you come up with something, a mock up an idea, whatever. And once you see it in front of you, you're like, well, now that I see it, this idea like really sucks. I need to change this and that, or even like just approach it in a completely different way. So vibe coding allows you to do that, right? It's like you're telling someone to do something and it produces it in front of you and you have the visual proof of it and you can play with it. So it's kind of like jamming with an AI instead of jamming with a human. So in other words, it's really turning ideas into reality at the speed of a conversation. So that's my soapbox. To summarize, essentially, I think the three takeaways here is that real behavior drives better priorities. So by letting users actually use your prototypes, you will see authentic behavior, which leads to smarter prioritization and decision making. There's a build, like, don't hesitate to go towards a build first mentality. Vibe coding is really embraces that cultural shift and like supports going away from long PRDs and decks into instantly testable and interactive prototypes. And doing that honestly will accelerate your discovery and innovation and allow you to ship valuable features at 10 times the speed. It is a very fun time to be alive. So I hope you take advantage of all of that and all of these tools that are now at your disposal. And thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions or would like to discuss this further, don't hesitate to reach out. You have my contact details on the last slides. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Sorry about that. Okay, trying to make sure I pull this up correctly. Okay, I'm trying to make sure I've got all of the questions here. All right, here are a couple of questions for you, Blanca.
Yeah.
All right, what is an example of a time vibe coding led a team in the wrong direction, and what safeguards could have caught it earlier?
Good question. I don't have an example that comes to mind right away. So I do think, I don't know if I'm going to answer the question exactly, but I can tell you that in my company, we have a lot of debates on what is a good use case of a vibe coded prototype versus not a good use case. And kind of like the debate goes to like the slide that I was showing before in the sense of like, is it better to do this with like a static Figma kind of prototype or actually vibe coding? I don't have any example of like, like things that did not lead us in the right way. I think like at the bare minimum, this is like a good tool to help people think, as I was saying. It's kind of like, enhancing your creativity. So even if it's like, building a prototype that you would consider bad, like you're not doing anything with it, at least the person learned something. So yeah, I can't think of like any scenario where like that hasn't been kind of like positive in any way.
Okay. Thank you. Do you mean adding a a vibe coded feature to the real tool for validation? Marina asked the question.
Yeah, I can see the question on the Q&A.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
So, okay, so like the first thing I would do is not to do a vibe coded feature into the real product for validation. The first thing I would do is like literally a prototype that lives kind of like outside of your platform. Actually, vibe coded tools, in my experience, are not really good at vibe coding within your environment. Like the environment is like way too complex, so that doesn't really work yet. With that said, though, I am starting to seeing examples of kind of like prototypes that we start building completely outside of the platform and putting it in the platform in kind of like some kind of like third party way. So like within an iframe or something like this. So this is obviously like not an elegant solution technically, but it is really being helpful and used for features that we have a lot of uncertainty on how they're going to get used. And they're like very complex to build. This is the approach that we're taking right now. We're kind of like vibe coding, putting into kind of like an iframe or like not elegant solution to really learn about the usage. And once we have that validation and that evidence, we do the kind of like heavy lifting and like serious engineering investment in building it in the right way.
And then there's one last question here. How do you vibe code without stepping on toes of your trio, getting them offside?
Good question. We have definitely been stepping on each other's toes because at the end of the day, this is a new technology, right? And as I said, I do think it's like shifting the role of everyone. And like right now we're in this transition. I would say it's, I mean, like, obviously it depends on who you work with. But what we've tried to do is to kind of like be okay with stepping on each other's toes as long as we kind of like communicate the intent, right? So, for example, if there's a PM building a prototype, it's not that they're trying to be a designer, like, not at all. And like kind of like the intent is that they do keep their designer in the loop, like, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm validating, etc. But with the expectation that the designer doesn't have to do work right now, but they have to be kind of like be kept in the loop. But I do think there's like some kind of like level setting or kind of like education on how to leverage vibe coding in your day-to-day and your product discovery lifecycle that I think your product leaders and like um, like product management leaders have to help in kind of like setting the right tone and helping everyone understand how this is going to get used. But yeah, I think the rules are like not super clear right now, and that's okay as long as like you communicate and you have some grace from for one another, I think.
Okay, I think you've answered all the questions here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Blanca, thank you so much for the talk. Again, all of these will be available to you via YouTube, and we'll be sending emails out to everyone. And from all of us at User Pilot, thank you for making Product Drive 2025 a success. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.